Good morning, and welcome to our webinar about Zentera's approach to Zero Trust Network Access in hybrid cloud. I am Marty Fabry, and I'm joined here by my colleague Syed Ashraf. We both work closely with our customers to understand their security needs and guide them to implement secure access solutions. Our focus as a team and as a company is to enable zero trust solutions, especially in the so-called brownfield environments. So the challenge that we are addressing is that the enterprises have been moving to cloud, but the distributed security infrastructure and operations are struggling to keep up with the business needs at fast pace. And perhaps needless to say, the business needs fundamentally include secure communications. This struggle is reflected in many scenarios spanning from evolving hybrid cloud applications through IT-OT convergence to close supplier and vendor collaboration use cases. And today we will take a closer look at one of these use cases where a project that has moved and is now being hosted at a cloud service provider still needs access to the various services that are continuing to reside in the corporate data center or on-prem. So what exactly is this challenge with today's typical network infrastructure, INO, and infrastructure and operations? Well, first, the traditional approach to a multi-site, multi-cloud network has been to employ various transport mechanisms to connect distant networks. Such connections work well. However, within each of these shared networks, there is an implied sense of trust between its resources. And the more networks we connect, the more sharing we therefore allow. Second, the perimeter firewalls have long been used to counter these, this network sharing. But this perimeter-based approach has its limitation, as well as substantial complexity. The more perimeters there are, the more firewalls there are, and the more complex is the management of the access paths traversing these networks. Or having only network perimeter-based controls makes it difficult to turn on only a narrow access if the machines are deep inside a segmented network. So then, for example, if we wanted to add an access path from a machine in a cloud VPC and communicating with an on-prem service, we are faced with an operational challenge. On one hand, we can take the time and effort to implement the new rules on every relevant firewall to minimize the new access. This would mean only allowing specific machines to talk to each other over the strictly specified ports and so on. That would help minimize the attack surface for the case where one of these machines were to be compromised. It would just take a lot of nuanced rule crafting every time we wanted to add a rule or an access path, and this is obviously an involved process. Alternatively, we could choose to implement some more inclusive rules that make the operational steps quicker. However, this comes at the cost of not minimizing the attack surface. And we see such dynamic playing out with a lot of our customers. And it is clearly a challenge, especially with the constantly expanding shared networks. Now, what if we didn't have to deal with any of that? What if there were a solution that let us leave the existing infrastructure as is and instead let us use overlay, more specifically secure overlay? What if this overlay could take care of all authentication for users, machine, as well as applications, and from the get-go would only carry traffic between authorized resources and over authorized policies? Such an overlay would not only simplify our lives, but also fundamentally subscribe to the tenets of zero trust. And that brings us to Zentera COIP Access Platform. Our overlay solution provides a simple means to register and onboard users and machines and protect their communications. Once these endpoints and applications communicate over the overlay, their policies can be centrally managed based on whitelists or identity verification. This overlay therefore implements what is called zero trust network access. It can also be used to implement microsegmentation and application segmentation, and we will learn more about those in a separate webinar. Next, let us briefly mention the steps involved in putting this platform to use. As I touched on earlier, we start by onboarding. Onboarding can be done with or without an agent. For example, installing an agent on a database server would immediately allow it to participate in the overlay. It would also allow us to cloak the application away from the underlay. Similarly, services such as an Active Directory or Git server can be onboarded and become available for applications or users to use. Next, we have users, which means enabling them with a local client to securely connect and use the overlay as well. Now we can configure access policies, and that, in other words, means who connects to what and how. As a quick note, our platform uniquely offers access controls all the way to the application, whether the application itself can use the network resources. For example, you can configure a policy such that only a database application can access a network on a specific port, whereas no other application can access that same port. We will see this in a demo in a moment. Lastly, after switching the application traffic to use the overlay, we can still use third-party tools for things like flow visibility, seam reporting, and so on. So this process, in a nutshell, allows us to take existing applications and their communications without having touched the infrastructure or underlay and place them under the strict communication controls of zero trust access. Now, I will hand it off to my colleague Syed to show you a quick demo.
Thanks, Mari. Let me share my screen. And so this is the demo topology that Marty had. We have an overlay network, and on the left side of this picture, you see an AWS cloud network, which will have two endpoints. And on the right side is the on-prem enterprise network, which has two application servers, the database server and the Git server. So for the interest of time, I already have onboarded one of the cloud endpoints, and I will do the second onboarding in a second. Once we have these resources, the workloads onboarded onto the cloud, then we have various options available how to connect them. So these are the two options that I will go in details in a second, whether you can have the connections when both sites have agent installed, or if one site is not open to install agent. So as we have seen that the cloud and mobility are disrupting the traditional network security model. So in this demo, I'll cover the hybrid multi-cloud. So the AWS side, as I'll show here, you can see that the AWS VM that I'm showing on the top left is running in the AWS data center in Northern California, whereas the machines on the right side, which are part of the on-prem network, are simulated by VMs running in Quest communication, which is CenturyLink. So now the question remains that the internet is your new parameter. So the question is that how to build these networks with agility and enterprise-grade security for a cloud and mobile first world. So as you can see that this is the simulated application profile where we build the topologies, and this is the AWS network. Currently, it has only one endpoint part of this network. I'll go ahead and onboard the uh, AWS endpoint to the Zero Trust overlay network. And you can similarly onboard the batch of workloads within minutes to keep up with the fast pace at which the business move, as Marty mentioned earlier. So let's go back that you saw that it took like about less than 10 seconds to get it onboarded. Let's go and verify. So you can see that now I have the second AWS endpoint. These are the IP addresses that these VMs got from AWS. And this is the private IP that Zentera assigned because of the private space that as they became part of the Zero Trust overlay network. And this is the IP that these VMs will use as they communicate securely over the hybrid network. So now that my machines are onboarded, I have multiple options that allows me to have a secure communication established between them over the secure overlay connection. So if the Zentera endpoint agent can be allowed on both sides, so this enables the end-to-end security, which is the bottom green arrow that you saw. So from the AWS workload on the left side, I will connect to the database server in the enterprise network. And if I show that, you can see that since I have an agent running, this is the private IP address that I was talking about that these machines will use. And on the bottom right is my database server, which also has the IP address assigned. So now my cloud endpoint uses the overlay IP of the database server to connect and use the application, MySQL application that is running. So as Marty mentioned earlier, that this brings like the agent makes these two endpoint separate from the other peers that they have in the underlay network. And now they are connected over the trusted TLS encrypted pipe. But this pipe is only good for the clone whitelisted applications that we have. So the client connects to the server using the CUIP address. We are not using the public underlay network anymore for this application to communicate. You can see that my client is connected to the database server. I can run any command on the server, see the list of databases. So this is the connection that is made end-to-end encrypted with agents running both on the client side as well as on the database server in the on-prem network. In case if you have a use case where the installation of an agent is not allowed, we can still make that work by keeping the workload part of the layer 3 network and making it connect to the other side of the network, which is running agent through something what we call the proxy gateway. So which is the top green arrow that you see here. I'll continue to use my AWS endpoint, and I'll show that I have the Git setup. The Git server is the machine that you see on the top right side, which has a Git repository, and the client will connect to the server to fetch that repository. So as you can see that I can connect to the server, the Git server, and fetch the repository is already up to date. But the point here is to show that the Git connection goes through. But the interesting aspect that Marty also mentioned, that we are onboarding specific applications. So this connection that you see, this green connection, secure connection between the client and the Git server, is not open for just any communication for any application. So the Git server, the client connects to the server using this IP, which you saw here. But if I try to reach this IP directly, or if I do SSH, you see that it's not allowed. Even though I'm sure you know that Git uses SSH as in data transport to make the communications happen between the Git client and the Git server. So this Git client can do and run any operation related to Git, which in the underlyingly uses SSH. But if the client tries to do a direct SSH to the server, that doesn't work. And that's why, because we have a very strict security posture, that this SSH is only allowed if it is executed as a child of a Git process. So there's a very strict, stringent security application interlock setting that is done on this link, which makes the security posture even stricter as these machines move to cloud. So essentially what we have done is that, just to recap what I've covered in this quick demo, is that I've shown first that how you can very quickly onboard your workloads within minutes to the Zero Trust overlay network. And then once their workloads are in the cloud, how they can securely communicate. You have various options. If you are allowed to install an agent, you can have an agent-to-agent communication, which we saw from the endpoint to the database server, or else you can even have the hybrid sort of a connection where one side having an agent or the other, and the other side doesn't, which was the case with a Git server. So note that this was all done within minutes. The enterprise grade security is now available to you. And in this demo, we just touched upon the hybrid multi-cloud, where one side is running in AWS and the other is in CenturyLink. And all this is done by being completely agnostic to your underlay infrastructure. So there was no touch to your underlay infrastructure as I build this Zero Trust overlay network with security. So this is all I wanted to cover in this short demo today. Back to you, Mari.
Thank you, Syed. Let me switch back to my screen. So thanks, Syed. So as Syed had mentioned, this was a quick look at one use case. And of course, we have a lot more use cases and a lot more capabilities that we could also show on our platform. So if anyone would like to learn more, please feel free to reach out to us or just to browse through our online resources. So we do have a couple of questions that I can address here. So first question, I already have VPNs and expensive firewalls in place. Do I need to get rid of them to use your overlay? So this is a common and a good question. You do not need to get rid of your existing appliances. As a perimeter level protection, it is always a good idea to keep your security controls in place. Having an overlay does not impact or interfere with your security appliances. The overlay merely allows you to dynamically add and manage point-to-point highly secure connections. And ultimately, that helps with minimizing the operational effort. So I hope that clarifies. Next question. Can I still have visibility using my existing tools? So yes, while we implement end-to-end encryption on the so-called shared network, we actually also implement the ability to securely pass that same traffic to your visibility and inspection tools for additional flow analysis or deeper inspection. Next question. What if my application is already running? Yeah, so after after the onboarding itself does not interfere with a running application. This switch to overlay usually takes well under a second to complete. So during this time, your application would see a little bit of a delay, but there is no need to restart your machines. And more importantly, there is no waiting for the tickets to be implemented in the existing infrastructure. So in all, in summary, we saw how Zentera overlay solution can be used to quickly deploy zero trust network access. Our overlay provides powerful controls and agility to help with any hybrid cloud secure connectivity needs. And more importantly, this sidesteps the underlay complexities that come with the usual sprawling network infrastructures. So I hope you have found this webinar informative, and hope to have you join us again in the future. Thank you.